The Yoon administration's diplomacy is centered on positioning South Korea as a state pivotal for global freedom, peace, and prosperity. Through value-centered diplomatic strategies, the government has fostered strong trilateral relations with the United States and Japan while expanding Korea's diplomatic horizon across continents. But these achievements have not been without challenges. The triumphs and trials of the Yoon administration's diplomacy, that's the topic of our discussion today. And to help us navigate through the diplomatic complexities, we have Choi Hyun-jin, Associate Professor of Political Science at Kyunghee University, here in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Good to see you again.
We also have Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, joining us from Washington, D.C. Always a great pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Professor Choi, let's kick things off with you. President Yoon held over 150 summits in total, and he made a dozen state visits last year alone. How would you define the first 2 years of the Yoon administration's diplomacy?
So in the second year of President Yoon Suk-yeol's term, we saw a shift from a strategic ambiguity to one of clarity. And notably, the South Korea's relationship with the democratic countries, such as the United States and Japan, got stronger. And the three countries advanced their cooperation to a new level. And one key achievement was the start of the Nuclear Consultative Group between South Korea and the United States, and also a major meeting with Joe Biden at Camp David led to a stronger security ties and the creation of the commitment to consult, which requires the two countries to communicate during crisis. And these actions, which are similar to a part of the NATO agreement, have greatly improved relationship between South Korea, the United States, and Japan, and almost making them a close allies. And however, the President Yoon's focus on promoting these democratic values has caused more tensions with China and also Russia. And in particular, China has complained about South Korea's actions regarding the issue of South China Sea and also its support for Taiwan, and which has made relation between Korea and China less warm. And relation with Russia have worsened too, partly because of Russia's close connection with North Korea, which keeps targeting South Korea as its main enemy. So in the middle of these international tensions, the President Yoon visited Ukraine to highlight the South Korea's dedication to democratic values. So these 2 years of Yoon's diplomacy has both achievement and also challenges. So looking ahead, I believe that the Yoon administration has to use a range of diplomatic tactics and work with the other countries, both bilaterally and also multilaterally, to tackle the global issues and reduce regional tensions, and mostly to encourage changes in North Korea.
As you pointed out, the Korea-U.S. Japan trilateral security cooperation has been elevated to quasi-alliance.
Right.
And this, as you mentioned, because Korea ended its strategic ambiguity and pivoted more closer to countries that share democratic values.
Yeah.
And on that note, Dr. Klingner, South Korea-U.S. ties are now stronger than ever, with the U.S. expanding its commitment to defend South Korea. The launch of their Nuclear Consultative Group is one good example. What's your overall assessment of President Yoon's efforts on this front and the current state of Seoul-Washington relations?
I think President Yoon's policies have been very successful. I've been focusing on Korea for over 30 years now, and I don't remember the relationship amongst Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo ever being this good. President Yoon's initiative in reaching out to Tokyo, though politically risky and also highly criticized within South Korea, enabled a dramatic improvement in relations between Seoul and Tokyo reciprocated with the resumption of a lot of meetings between the two countries, and also trilaterally we've had a resumption of military exercises amongst the three countries, and also the initiation of real-time exchange of information on North Korean missile launches. So from Washington's view, the President Yoon's policies have been very successful. The relationship right now is very strong, and what we've seen is the like-minded democracies in Northeast Asia with the U.S. Right now are working very well together. And as the Chinese and North Korean threats have increased, the relationships and the responses by the three countries have been much more aligned with each other. So, Washington is very pleased. We think that the Camp David summit, as well as the individual summits with Prime Minister Kishida and President Yoon, have been very forthcoming in improving the relations and aligning our policies in a much greater detail than I ever remember.
So Seoul and Washington, their relations stronger than ever before, and this coming from a top expert who've been closely examining their relations for over 30 years. Now, Professor Che, the restoration of shuttle diplomacy between the leaders of Korea and Japan is also touted as one of President Yoon's key diplomatic achievements. But Japan's unyielding stance on historical issues appears to be once again jeopardizing the improved relations. Where does Korea-Japan relations stand now?
Okay. Last year, the South Korean government proposed a plan to pay compensation to the victims of forced labor during the Japanese occupation era, hoping to improve relations with Japan. And since then, more South Koreans have visited Japan, and also the popularity of Korean wave such as K-pop has grown in Japan. And this shows the relationship between the two countries is getting stronger. But however, as you mentioned, there are still issues with how Japan acknowledges its past. For example, last month, several important Japanese politicians visited the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, which honors the spirit of war criminals from World War II, including former Prime Minister Dojo Hideki, who is a symbol of Japanese militarism. So in addition, Prime Minister Kishida didn't talk about historical issues in his speech to U.S. Congress last April, unlike former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who expressed remorse in 2016. So this makes it somehow difficult to expect Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party to change its view of history to match South Korean perspective, despite the need for stronger diplomatic ties between the two countries. So if Japan doesn't shift its stance on recognizing history, it will be challenging to win the support of the South Korean people for improving relation between the two countries. Since historical issues can't be fixed quickly, South Korea needs to keep gathering information and clearly state its position on historical matters and also the Dokdo issue, while also working to enhance relation with Japan in a forward-looking way.
President Yoon, when asked about this, has said that the two countries need to have patience and need to continue walking toward the same goal. So consistency also seems to be the key here. And as the Yoon administration clearly pivoted toward the U.S. and Japan, balancing relations, as you've alluded to at the top, balancing relations with China and Russia remains a key challenge. Would President Yoon be able to mend soured relations with those two strategically important nations during the remainder of his term?
That's a very challenging situation for South Korea. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration decision have been key in strengthening the Korean relation with the United States and Japan, and in enhancing the cooperation between these three countries. However, it's now important to improve relation with China and Russia because they are powerful neighbors to the Korean Peninsula. The ongoing tension between the U.S. and China, some people call it a new Cold War. This created a difficult situation for South Korea, which has a close military ties with the United States and also a strategic partnership with China. And in addition, China is the #1 trading partner for South Korea. And because of this, the South Korea faces a greater challenge and the need to rethink its approach to communicating with China as well as Russia. Then therefore, I think it is essential for South Korea to manage its relation with the United States and Japan, and also improve relation with China and Russia to ensure they do not support North Korea's actions against the international norm. And specifically, the South Korea needs to make it clear to China that supporting North Korea, which openly violates international law, does not really help China's global reputation. And also recognizing China's significant role in East Asia, the Yoon administration should continually work towards building a healthy and a mature relationship with China that benefits both countries based on the mutual respect and also shared interests in East Asia.
Well, it's a daunting task, but we're going to have to keep trying to strike that delicate diplomatic balance. And we also want to get your thoughts on this, Dr. Klingner. South Korea's relations with Russia quickly turned sour as Moscow bonded closely with Pyongyang for weapons and ammunition. The general consensus here in Seoul is that it'll be extremely challenging for South Korea to repair damaged ties with Russia until the war in Ukraine comes to an end. What's your take?
Well, I think many were surprised at how soft President Yoon's comments were about Russia, given Moscow's brutal invasion of Ukraine, as well as its purchases of missiles and ammunition from North Korea. Other nations have been much more directly critical of Moscow's actions. South Korea has been seen as a bit of a reluctant responder, and back in the Moon administration, South Korea only imposed sanctions after other nations had, and really it seemed in response to international criticism of South Korea's timidity in responding to Moscow's action. Also, other nations have been more directly critical of Beijing for its transgressions, not only against human rights within its own country, but also its actions in the East and South China Seas. So President Yoon is seemingly trying to balance the relations with like-minded democracies and also the brutal authoritarian regimes in Moscow and Beijing. So he's trying to balance it, but it does raise some criticism here in the United States that South Korea seems to be more reluctant when it comes to responding to violations of international law, as well as the invasion of Ukraine.
It's not easy for South Korea to strike that balance. And there are some areas where Korea and Russia can both boost cooperation to seek mutual benefits. And calls are growing that it's about time for the two countries to focus more on economic mutual benefits, which is probably why President Yoon has been showing a softer stance on Russia lately. Professor Che, inter-Korean tensions are reaching new highs as the Yoon administration sticks to its hardline North Korea policy while boosting U.S. extended deterrence. And amid signs of a new Cold War, what are your prospects for future inter-Korean relations?
The future of inter-Korean relations is unfortunately not bright. In May 2022, President Yoon Suk-yeol took a forward-looking approach in his inaugural speech by suggesting talks to peacefully solve the North Korean nuclear problem. And later on August 15, he proposed a plan to boost North Korean economy and also public welfare if North Korea stopped its nuclear activities and also truly moved toward denuclearization. And his proposal included offering large-scale food to North Korea and also updating its power infrastructure, ports, and airports to help with the international trade. However, this proposal from South Korea have struggled to reach the North Korean government because of Kim Jong-un's unwillingness to compromise and also his aggressive approach towards South Korea. And this has raised fears that the relationship between the two Korea could get worse. And especially since the end of last year, the North Korea has treated its relationship with South Korea as hostile, making it even harder to talk and work together. Unfortunately, considering the current situation inside North Korea and also the broader international environment around the Korean Peninsula, such as the new Cold War between the U.S. and China, it seems very difficult to improve relations with North Korea in the near future. And significant progress or shift in North Korea's stance seems unlikely at this point. Nonetheless, there might still be some opportunities for dialogue between the two Koreas, possibly through humanitarian aid and also family reunions, depending on how things evolve on the Korean Peninsula.
And the upcoming U.S. presidential election is also expected to have a significant impact on future inter-Korean relations, given that Trump has a drastically different approach to North Korea, right, in many ways. And regarding the U.S. presidential election, Dr. Klingner, President Yoon has said that it's quote-unquote, inappropriate for him as a nation's leader to predict the outcome of another country's election results and prepare measures in advance. What do you think would be President Yoon's biggest challenges ahead in handling bilateral issues with the U.S. considering the election?
Well, politicians often say that it's best not to answer hypothetical questions because doing so only gets you in trouble. So when the reporters asked him about what would happen if President Trump was reelected and how U.S.-South Korean relations would go, he pretty much ducked the question. And so if President Trump was reelected, there's the concern that he would resume some of the policies of his first administration, most notably the special measures agreement negotiations, where he had sought to dramatically increase the South Korean contribution, in essence, to make a profit off of the American servicemen and women in uniform stationed overseas. Things were very tense during his first term in relations between Washington and Seoul. President Trump also had canceled military exercises, which led to a degradation in the alliance deterrence and defense capability. So we've seen that Washington and Seoul under the Biden administration have initiated the negotiations for the renewal of special measures agreement about a year early in order to try to reach an agreement before the U.S. election. Whether that's possible or not, I think is uncertain, but it's really a recognition of the tension that could arise during a second Trump administration over special measures agreement and the size of South Korean contribution to offset the cost of stationing U.S. forces overseas.
And before we let you go, Professor Che, what were some of the key points from President Yoon's address to the nation and the subsequent Q&A session that caught your attention?
Yes, I watched the press conference of President Yoon Suk-yeol yesterday. And as we expected, most of the issues focused on domestic political ones. But there are some few questions about diplomacy. And one of them that caught my attention was the question about the relationship between Korea and Russia. And as Russia and North Korea's cooperation grows nowadays during this Ukraine war, there has been some interesting questions about how South Korea is dealing with Russia and also dealing with the relationship between Russia and North Korea. So President Yoon Suk-yeol during this press conference mentioned that South Korea has had a long-standing good relationship with Russia. And he explained that this relationship includes working together on some issues while disagreeing on others, and always trying to boost economic ties and share the benefit as smoothly as possible. And President Yoon also brought up that during the war in Ukraine, North Korea has been supplying weapons to Russia, and actually some North Korean some bombs and weapons are used during this war in Ukraine. And he stressed that, unlike North Korea, the South Korea strictly avoids sending offensive lethal weapons to Ukraine. And he also noted that North Korea's actions of exporting such weapons to Ukraine both support illegal military actions by Russia and also clearly break the UN Security Council resolution. And he stated that South Korea would handle this issue through the UN and also the global community.
Well, we have important diplomatic events coming up this month, from Russian President Putin's visit to China and also the Korea-China-Japan trilateral summit expected to be held at the end of this month. And so we'll be sure to closely monitor those developments as well. Thank you, as always, Professor Che and Dr. Klingner, for your insights. And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back with more same time next week. Have a great weekend.